Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. Today, October 7th, marks 2 years since Hamas attacked Israel, and the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Israel's military response has resulted in tens of thousands of Palestinian casualties. For some perspective on the past 2 years of the war in Gaza, we welcome Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director of the McCain Institute. Dr. Farkas, good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Your thought, 2 years to the day. Your thoughts?
Well, thanks for having me, Ted. Look, it's a tragedy that we are at this 2-year mark. We shouldn't be here at all, but I will say that there's some room for hope. It looks like the negotiations are serious and both sides are being pressured, meaning the Israeli government is being pressured by President Trump and Hamas is being pressured by the Gulf states and the neighboring states, Egypt and Jordan. So the dynamic is such that we can be a little bit optimistic, which makes it different from last year.
Why did, 2 years ago, why did Hamas commit this kind of an attack? What did they think that they would accomplish?
Well, most analysts believe that they wanted to, of course, draw attention to the plight of the Palestinian people and to make the argument for a Palestinian state. But other than that, I mean, it was a gruesome, I don't even have the right words because it was an abomination of human rights, assault against innocent Israeli people, the things that they did to women, to children, then they, leaving aside the torture and the killing, which was bad enough. Then, of course, they abducted innocent people, including grandparents, elderly people, people of all ages, a mother with her young children who unfortunately died in captivity, and took them it took them hostage. And of course, there were many other Israelis who were killed in the fighting that occurred from that day forward.
From
Hamas and then also Hezbollah.
Indeed, but the mindset that if we do these things, these atrocities, we videotape some of these things. The mindset that the rest of the world will what? Join us? I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, Ted, I can't understand that either. It was just beyond the pale. It was inhumane. Again, it was the kind of thing that is outlawed under, international law, under the Geneva Conventions that, we have seen, yes, since World War II, but I don't think anyone imagined that these terrorists would actually do what they did to these innocent people. And these were largely people who lived in a hope for peace. They were largely leftist and peacenik, some of them. They were living in kibbutzim, just minding their own business or going to a music festival in some cases. So they were hardly any kind of right-wing militant that would have opposed rights for Palestinians.
Let's talk about the Israeli response. What did Israel think would happen when the military offensive has, the old line from Vietnam, turning it into a parking lot? I mean, goodness gracious, parts of Gaza are a parking lot right now. I mean, if you clean it up. I mean, what did Israel think? Did Israel think the rest of the world would join them in absolutely annihilating much of the Gaza Strip?
Well, Ted, if we spin the clock back all the way 2 years, in the beginning, everybody understood, and to this day, everybody understood that Israel has the right to self-defense. They were attacked on their home front by these terrorists in a gruesome fashion. They had to retaliate. They had to eliminate the ongoing threat. And frankly, that threat was not just coming from Hamas, which was just one of Iran's proxies, but it was coming from Hezbollah across the Lebanese border. It was coming from the Houthis in Yemen, which continue to be a threat to Israel. And then, of course, Iran, which was, basically more or less behind the scenes supporting, controlling. We don't know if they were directing. Doesn't matter. Iran was also and continues to also be a threat to Israel. So the Israelis were absolutely, they had the right to go to war, to a war of self-defense. They had international law on their side. The problem was that as time went on, the way that they were prosecuting this war became problematic for human rights and, frankly, many people in the Israeli public. for a number of reasons. One, because it endangered the hostages, which all Israelis, the overwhelming number of Israelis, 70+%, believe that the number one priority of their government should be to bring home the hostages. So one, endangerment of the hostages. And then, of course, what happened to innocent civilians in Gaza. The way that the war was fought was endangering them. And meanwhile, the military, over time, increasingly and ever more loudly said that Hamas is no longer a military threat to the Israeli state. So those three factors together combined to make it look now today like you mentioned the parking lot.
Yeah. It seems to me, Evelyn, can we say that Hamas succeeded in the sense of getting attention to Palestinian states and rights and these sorts of, that conversation? Did Israel succeed in getting Hamas to demilitarize? I don't know if they've demilitarized, but they certainly don't have any military power right now, or very, very little. Did both sides succeed as both sides failed?
Yeah, I think you put it really well. I would say the Hamas, though, really has lost. And maybe the Palestinian people gained a greater appreciation for acknowledgement of their plight. But frankly, I think every Palestinian mother, father, brother, etc., who lost a loved one in Gaza would gladly not have made that sacrifice. So the Hamas fighters did this on the backs of innocent people, innocent Palestinians, and they had no right to make that decision for the Palestinian people. So, I think that Hamas is a loser in all of this, and they deserve to be the loser in all of this. Israel is overall a winner strategically. Certainly, Israel was able to take, as much as you can take advantage of such a horrible tragedy, they did lash out and essentially eliminate Hamas, and not just Hamas, but Hezbollah as a threat to Israel through stunning attacks that they were using special operations forces to take out the fighters using pagers. And then, of course, they followed that up with missile and airstrikes. And then they struck directly at Iran, which was also dramatic and unprecedented. And of course, the United States followed in afterwards, just striking those military facilities, or those facilities where the nuclear weapons were made. But Israel did, frankly speaking, alter the geostrategic map. Israel now has vanquished or if not vanquished, tremendously weakened its foes. Iran is back on its heels, if you will. But Israel has a PR problem because, as you say, the way that they prosecuted this war and the inability to show the Palestinian people, the Jewish people of Israel, and the world that they have a plan to bring this to a peaceful conclusion has hurt Israel.
Does that PR problem go away? Does a Palestinian state become more of a reality? Do all of these things, are these all possible now because of those actions, the actions against Hezbollah, against Iran, against the Houthis, the whole nine yards, and U.S. involvement? Talk about U.S. involvement here and how important that has been.
Well, I think, Ted, we shouldn't be overly optimistic. I think what we're looking at is the possibility of a resolution to the conflict in Gaza. So that's a very, narrowly defined thing here, that we could see what the Trump administration put forward, this 20-point plan, is frankly the plan that anyone would have put forward at the beginning of all of this, but it required the outside actors to effectively use their power and influence on the players and to force them to make the compromises that hopefully will be made. But ultimately, Hamas needs to be completely demilitarized, and there needs to be a plan for Israel to turn over military control to an interim force, and ultimately political and military control to a legitimate Palestinian force that the international community has trained and that politically has the support and the trust, at least to some extent, of the international community and of Israel. That already is hard enough. I'm not going to begin to be waxing optimistic about resolving the bigger issue between Israel and the Palestinian people, or Israel and Palestine, which is to say what's happening on the West Bank, whether there's still a viable two-state solution in the future. I think there has to be, but we're a ways away from that right now.
And it sounds like we're a ways away even from, what did this first step of ending the war. I can't remember if it was President Clinton or President Carter talking about Yasser Arafat dealing with the PLO when they had everything right there and saying that Arafat wouldn't say yes and wouldn't say no.
Clinton.
Yeah, was that Clinton
Clinton
saying that?
Yeah, I mean, they talk about snatching victory from the jaws of defeat, or
Yes,
snatching defeat from the jaws of
yes,
victory.
yes.
I do think in this case, the Gulf states, the neighboring states, I mean, this has put incredible pressure on them in terms of the humanitarian crisis, and they are now pushing Hamas. The Qataris have been really interesting, not just in this crisis, but in several other areas where they're negotiating behind the scenes. And if they really can guarantee some kind of safety for the militants who put down the terrorists, who put down their weapons, these Hamas fighters, then I think there is the possibility for proceeding. Much hinges on those fighters, really disarming.
Dr. Evelyn Farkas again, the McCain Institute. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Great information.
Thank you, Ted.